In August 1943, deep in the forests of East Prussia, General Adolf Galland, commander of the German fighter force, delivered a warning that should have reshaped the Luftwaffe's air defense doctrine. Instead, it was dismissed with a single word: impossible. By the summer of 1943, the US Army Air Forces had begun extending their daylight bombing campaigns deeper into German-occupied Europe. Strategic targets inside the Reich were now in range of the American 8th Air Force's B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators. But there was a catch: bomber losses were heavy. Once these formations flew beyond the limited range of their escorts, they were at the mercy of the Luftwaffe. The Americans were aware of the problem. To solve it, they turned to the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, a twin-engine fighter with distinctive twin booms and powerful armament. The P-38 could fly farther than previous fighters, especially when equipped with external drop tanks. When P-38 units began operating from England in the fall of 1943, they were the only Allied fighters capable of escorting bombers into Germany itself. German intelligence initially underestimated the P-38. Galland himself, earlier in the year, had compared it to Germany's underperforming Bf-110, concluding it shared the same shortcomings. But by August, reality had begun to contradict those assumptions. On August 17, 1943, the US launched a dual bombing raid on Regensburg and Schweinfurt. While the missions caused damage, they also exposed the vulnerability of unescorted bombers. 60 B-17s were lost. Yet during this operation, German forces reported something unexpected: encounters with American escort fighters well beyond their anticipated range. Wreckage of P-38s was found near Liège in eastern Belgium, an area the Luftwaffe believed was out of reach for Allied escorts. Reports confirmed sightings and engagements with American fighters in the area. For Galland, this was a turning point. He decided to deliver the news personally. Galland travelled to the Führerhauptquartier, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. There, he met with Hermann Göring, the Luftwaffe's supreme commander. The setting was Göring's special train, parked on a railway platform after a military briefing. Galland informed Göring that P-38 fighters had been escorting bomber streams to unprecedented distances. He noted physical proof, wreckage, captured drop tanks, and pilot reports. The evidence pointed clearly to the fact that Allied fighters had been encountered near Liège. Liège is approximately 250 kilometers from the North Sea. That meant Allied single-engine fighters were reaching nearly to the German border. If they could make it to Liège in August 1943, Galland argued, it would only be a matter of time before they were escorting bombers deep into the Reich. Göring's response was immediate and hostile. He rejected Galland's assessment outright. According to eyewitness accounts, including that of Armaments Minister Albert Speer, Göring erupted with disbelief. He insisted that no Allied fighter could possibly reach that far. His words, quoted later by multiple sources, were, "That is impossible." Göring drew on his outdated experience as a World War I pilot. He claimed with confidence that such range was beyond the capabilities of Allied fighters. Despite the physical evidence and first-hand reports, Göring declared that the presence of P-38s over Liège could not be true. Speer later testified that Göring went so far as to forbid Galland from discussing the matter any further. Galland was effectively silenced. Göring ordered him to accept, as fact, that Allied fighters could not reach that distance. Galland's own recollections in his memoir, The First and the Last, confirm this confrontation. He recounts how his efforts to warn Göring about the growing threat of long-range escorts were met with denial and derision. Galland later described how, in frustration, he and a fellow officer took to the skies in FW-190s to confirm what they already suspected. They encountered American fighters far beyond the supposed escort limit. One of them was shot down. The August 17, 1943 meeting marked a breakdown in communication between the Luftwaffe's high command and its fighter leadership. Galland, who understood the changing realities of the air war, was trying to prompt action. Göring, insulated and unwilling to accept uncomfortable truths, chose denial. This wasn't just a personal clash, the implications were strategic. If Galland's warning had been heeded, the Luftwaffe could have begun reconfiguring its tactics and production priorities months earlier. Fighter units could have been reinforced, high-performance aircraft development accelerated, and new interception strategies implemented to deal with the changing nature of the Allied air offensive. Instead, Göring's response delayed these changes. When Allied fighters eventually began escorting bombers all the way to targets like Bremen and back, just a few months later, the Luftwaffe was caught unprepared. The historical record strongly supports Galland's version of events. Speer's testimony at the Nuremberg trials detailed the confrontation. He confirmed that Galland reported the P-38 presence over Liège and that Göring dismissed it furiously, forbidding further discussion. These accounts are backed by historians like Williamson Murray and Donald Caldwell, who have studied Luftwaffe command dysfunction during the air war. Beyond the incident itself, Galland's frustration reflected a larger issue: the Luftwaffe's failure to properly assess the evolving Allied threat. For much of 1942 and early 1943, German leadership had assumed that the Americans could not solve the escort problem. They believed bomber formations, flying in tight defensive boxes, would survive without fighter cover. That illusion shattered in 1943. The use of drop tanks allowed P-38s and later P-47s to dramatically extend their range. American fighters began escorting bombers deeper into Europe. Challenging the Luftwaffe's interceptors, German pilots encountered these escorts in growing numbers, reporting new tactics and hardware. Even before August 1943, British reconnaissance Spitfires had overflown Berlin, suggesting that long-range fighter operations were possible. RAF experiments with early Mustangs also showed the potential for deep escort missions. Yet within the Luftwaffe High Command, these developments were ignored or minimized. Galland, by contrast, was in close contact with frontline units. He saw the trend emerging. He received pilot reports, viewed wreckage firsthand, and analyzed enemy tactics. His August 17th warning was based on data and personal observation, but Göring would not listen. His refusal to accept reality was symptomatic of a broader leadership failure. The Luftwaffe was being outpaced technologically and tactically. By the time the command acknowledged the problem, it was too late. By November 1943, Allied escorts were routinely accompanying bombers to their targets. On November 3rd, a raid on Wilhelmshaven was met by P-38s and P-47s, flying all the way, and losses for the Luftwaffe were severe. The Germans began to adapt, but reactively. Galland convened an emergency meeting of fighter leaders on November 4th. New tactics were introduced, including the Gefechtsverband, pairing heavy FW-190s with lighter Bf-109s to attack bombers while covering each other from escorts. Sturmböcke formations with armor and heavy cannon were also fielded. But these changes came too late to alter the trajectory. The Allies were producing more planes, training more pilots, and fielding better technology. The Luftwaffe, strained by losses and production bottlenecks, was unable to maintain air superiority. Göring's leadership continued to be questioned. Galland remained in command until early 1945, but his clashes with Göring became increasingly bitter. Eventually, he was removed after protesting the mismanagement of the fighter arm. The August 1943 incident remains a powerful example of strategic denial at the highest levels. Galland, who had the experience and insight to foresee the coming crisis, was silenced. Göring, clinging to outdated assumptions and personal pride, refused to acknowledge the change. When P-51 Mustangs finally appeared over Berlin in 1944, even Göring had to admit what Galland had predicted all along. He famously said, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." That recognition came too late. In the end, Galland's warning in August 1943 was not only accurate, it was prophetic, but his superiors' inability to accept reality ensured that the Luftwaffe would stay one step behind, a delay that helped seal Germany's defeat in the skies.